Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. Today I'm going to be talking about my top 5 books of 2023. 2023 was a very unique year in my life. Got married, moved, renovated a house, did lots of stuff. And so my reading has kind of been all over the place this year. If you've been watching my channel, you know this all already. And so I'm not going to go too much into it, but that kind of influenced how obviously my reading went and therefore it influenced my top books of the year. I hit a number of reading slumps. I read less than I usually do, which is all fine. It happens, life happens. I definitely had a harder time putting together this list compared to previous years. And so my method for putting together a top list of the year that I do every year is just to look at the books that I rated really highly. Usually I have a shelf on Goodreads where I mark them as favorites, but I didn't do a good job of doing that over 2023. And so this year I just looked at all of the books that I rated 4 stars or higher. I ended up with a list of 16 books. And I was like, that doesn't feel quite like my favorites though. And so from there, I sort of winnowed the list down. And then I got to about a top 10. But even that list felt like it was including books that I really enjoyed, but I wouldn't necessarily call them a favorite. I don't know. I was just didn't feel quite right with that list. And so then I was like, let me see how I feel about a top 5. The top 5 just feels right for the amount of books that I read and then the way that I feel about the books that I'm going to be talking about. And one thing that I'm going to do in this video that I don't typically do is have an honorable mentions list. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the 5 books that I didn't include from that top 10, partially because it was a little bit of a debate or fight almost in my head of which one of these books should go in the 5th spot, because I had a really good experience with all of them and there were different reasons why I loved all of them. The top 4 are definitely my top 4 of the year. There is a 5th book on this list where there's a chance that I could have swapped that book out for a different book in my top 10, if that makes sense. And so I thought it would be really nice to have 5 honorable mentions that I'll just go through really quickly, and a couple of housekeeping notes. One, these are my favorite books of the year. I'm not making declarative statements about anything beyond that. 2, these are books that I read in 2023. They weren't necessarily books that were all published in 2023. And then the final thing is that I will have links down below to as many different videos as I can for all of the books that I'm about to mention, just in case you're interested in finding more information, because obviously I'm not going to be able to talk about them quite as deeply in this video. So for my honorable mentions, I have If I Never Met You by Mari McFarlane. This is probably my favorite romance book that I read this year. Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson. Wonderful, heartwarming story that, yeah, just made me feel really nice and happy at the beginning of the year. All the Sinners Bleed by S.A. Cosby. This book was just such a great thriller, in my opinion. I really enjoyed my experience with reading that book. Hello Beautiful, which I thought was a really moving book. It made me cry at various points over the course of reading that book, but there were also minor details that I was not bothered by, but I was just by. And so I was it just barely missed the cut. And then How to Turn Into a Bird, which is one of those books where I have read it pretty recently, and so part of me hesitated on putting that book on my top 5 just because I need to sit with the book, I feel for longer before I know for sure that it could hit my top 5. Okay, so now on to my top 5 books of 2023. I'm going to be going through these books in a chronological order of when I read them through the year. There isn't an official ranking, but I'll give you a vague sense of where they fall in the spectrum of my favorite books. So the first book that I have to talk about is After the Lights Go Out by John Vercher. And so this is the book where I could have potentially swapped this out for one of the honorable mentions that I talked about before, but there's a couple of reasons why I included this on my list. So in the story, you are following this young man named Xavier, who is a former MMA fighter, and due to him participating in these fights, he is now suffers from CTE and deals with significant memory loss and things like that. And so you are following him as he's kind of post his career, basically trying to figure out what he's going to do. He's now doesn't have a way of holding down a good job, and he's suffering with a lot. He also has a complicated relationship with his father. And yeah, you just kind of are following this character as he deals with his life post MMA and the choices that he's forced to make and things like that. This is a book that I was sent by the publisher, and I wasn't originally interested in it based on the synopsis, but I know that John Bircher wrote a book called 3/5 that a lot of people really loved. And I was like, let me just give it a try before I ignore it. And I actually ended up picking up this one on audio as well. I was able to find the audiobook on Hoopla, and it emotionally wrecked me. And one of the reasons why this one edged out other books for this top 5 spot is because I just feel like not enough people know about this book and not enough people are reading this book, because the emotional roller coaster that I went through while listening to this book was deep. And I just feel like there are a lot of people out there who would really enjoy this book, but they aren't paying attention to it because I think it's published by a somewhat smaller press, and it's also a book about MMA and things like that. And so I feel like people are going to see this and be like, I'm not into sports books. This seems not up my alley or anything along those lines. But I'm here to tell you this book is fantastic and people need to read this book. And so if there was one book on this entire list that I want people to pick up more than anything else, I feel like it's this one. Mostly because I think it's the most underrated one on my list. So yeah, this is a book that has really stayed with me, really took me off guard, really surprised me. And I highly recommend the audiobook as well. The next book on my list is Foster by Claire Keegan. This is a book that I did not have on my radar at all. And then someone in one of my comment sections recommended this book to me at one point, and I ended up getting it from the library, and it just absolutely blew me away. This is a tiny little novella where you are following this young girl who ends up going to basically her aunt and uncle's house for a summer because her parents have multiple kids, have another kid on the way, and they're overwhelmed, so that she gets sent to her aunt and uncle's house who don't have a kid. And it's just so beautiful. It's a novella, so I don't want to say too much about it. Just go into it. But I just found it to be just a really beautiful, moving experience. There's nothing about that book that I would want to change, partially because it's a novella, and so it's very short and to the point, but it's just so well crafted, and it's so impressive how emotionally attached I got to those characters and what was happening in such a short period of time. I never had any interest in picking up Claire Keegan, and now I'm I need to pick up Claire Keegan books because this was just so well done. And I've had multiple people tell me after reading Foster that her other books are just as good as well. And so I'm very excited to pick up more books from her. And this is definitely a book that's just oh, it's just perfect. It's a perfect encapsulation. It's exactly what novellas should be. So the next 2 books are books that I ended up picking up because I was reading through Obama's summer book recommendation list. So thanks, Obama. The first one is Blue Hour by Tiffany Clark Harrison, and this is definitely one that I never heard of prior to that list, and I don't know if I would have picked it up otherwise. This is another one that's on the shorter side. It's less than 200 pages, and you are following this unnamed narrator who is married. She is biracial. I believe she's Japanese and Black, and she's a photographer and things like that, and you're just following her as she deals with her anxieties of living in modern America. She has been unable to have a child so far with her husband, and so she's dealing with just the grief that comes along with being infertile and reckoning with whether or not she even wants to have children in this world. There's also part of this book that talks about a young boy that she knows who is attacked by the police, and so part of that also comes into play about her thoughts about motherhood and things like that, and whether she even wants to bring another kid into this world and things like that, and just a lot of different anxieties along those lines. And as a person who is recently married and having conversations about having kids and things like that, this book expressed a lot of thoughts that I've had in my head about that, and a lot of my anxieties and stuff like that in a way that I hadn't really read before. And I just thought it was really beautiful. It's very much a slow moving meditation. It's very much in the main narrator's head the entire time and stuff like that. And so I feel this is one where I could see the writing style not working for people, but I really enjoyed the contemplative nature of this book and the author creating this character who is expressing these thoughts and anxieties about life and motherhood and how to exist in this world when there's just So much happening all the time. The next book on the list is Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. And this is a book that I don't think I need to talk too much about because I feel like it's been on everyone's favorite books list. That's at least everyone that's read it, I feel like ends up loving it. And it's been on a lot of like bestseller lists, a lot of like major publications bestseller lists. So if you haven't heard about this book yet, I'd be just surprised, honestly, if you're paying attention to bookish stuff, unless I'm literally the only person you watch. And also, yes, I did get the beautiful edition from Barnes & Noble for Christmas. One of the few things I got for Christmas this year, and I love it so much. Anyways, if you aren't aware, this is following a character who everyone calls Demon Copperhead. I think his real name is Damon, so everyone calls him Demon. And he has like bright red hair, so everyone calls him Demon Copperhead. And he lives in like the southern Appalachian mountain area. He is born to a single mother. His father died, and he doesn't know like anything about his father or his father's side of the family. His mother deals with addictions and things like that, and it's literally just a story about survival. You are following this character as he is telling the story of his life from like birth through adulthood, and this character just goes through so much. Like, this book feels so harrowing at times and so heartbreaking at times, but there's also this like level of humor that this character has that really brightens this whole book in a way that feels really realistic, because it would be really easy to write this harrowing story of this kid who lives in this like lower income area, doesn't have a lot of opportunities available to him, things like that, and just make it really terrible and just like feel almost painful to read. But the way that this book is structured is in a way that I feel like is very realistic, because it's like, even if you're going through hard stuff, there are good days, there are funny moments, there is hope on occasion, things like that. And you see like this character continue to push against basically everything that's expected of him, everything that's provided for him, stuff like that, and just continue to try to survive and continue to try to even thrive in this world. This book isn't filled with just like terrible things that happen to him. Like, good things do happen as well. But, you know, in the realities of this world, he goes through some really difficult and dark like situations and gets to some dark places. But I feel like the way that Barbara Kingsolver writes this is that it's just so affecting and so realistic and just so beautiful. Like, I love this book so much. I also listened to this one on audiobook, and the audiobook narrator is so fantastic. I feel like it works even better as an audiobook personally. Like, I remember getting the ebook for this briefly and reading a couple of pages and being like, it's not working for me, and then doing the audiobook and then like just fully immersing myself in the audiobook. And yeah, this is like one of those books where like, when people are asking me for their favorites or for my favorite book of the year and they're looking specifically for a recommendation, this is the book I've been recommending to everyone this year, because I just feel like no matter what, if you are the type of person who likes fiction books and are willing to read like contemporary fiction books, then like this is going to be a book that I think most people are going to love. And the final book that I have on my list of top 5 books of 2023 is Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. I did a full review on this book, so I'll have that linked for you guys to check out in case you're interested. But Ann Patchett has slowly become one of my all-time favorite authors. I've read a number of her books at this point, and I just really enjoy what she does. This is the story of this woman named Laura, who is basically recounting this very specific part of her life where she was an actress and she ends up being part of this production of Our Town in Michigan, and she plays that across from someone who is now a really famous movie actor, and they even had a relationship and stuff like that. And so she's recounting this story to her daughters, and the recounting of this story also takes place during the pandemic and during lockdown and things like that. But this is just like another really beautiful coming of age story as you are following this young woman as she's just like recounting the story of her life to her daughters. And there's like this really beautiful family aspect of this story, as well as kind of like this slow reveal of what actually happened in this woman's life. Because at some point her daughters found out that she dated like this famous actor and stuff like that. And so they think that they know the story. And so during this time period, Laura decides that she's going to tell like the full story of what exactly happened. And just this book is just really, really beautiful. I feel like Ann Patchett does a really great job of creating characters and creating like these really deep relationships between characters. And she also leans on the side of like melodrama a little bit, but in a way that keeps you compelled. And at least for me personally, it keeps me compelled and it keeps me engaged with the story, but it's not so melodramatic that it feels like cheesy or anything along those lines. Yeah, I just really love this book. I couldn't put it down when I was reading it. I think I finished it in like 2 days or something along those lines, and it was just so fantastic, so well done. So yeah, definitely a favorite of the year, and continues to provide evidence as to why Ann Patchett is one of my favorite authors. So yeah, those are my top 5 books of 2023. Let me know down in the comments below if you've read any of the books that I mentioned here today and what your thoughts were on them. Or if you want, you can let me know what your favorite books were of this year, because I'm always looking for good recommendations. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.